Just a few reminders for you. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you are done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize any interference. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. Unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise the chair. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we want to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses who have joined us today. From the Office of the Auditor General are Martin Dompierre, Assistant Auditor General, Philippe Legoff, Principal, and Lucy Dupree, Director. And from the Canada Revenue Agency, Bob Hamilton, Commissioner of Revenue and Chief Executive Officer, Mark Lemieux, Assistant Commissioner, Collections and Verification Branch, Frank Vermaeten, Assistant Commissioner, Assessment, Benefit and Service Branch, and Heather Daniels, Director General, Benefit Programs Directorate, Assessment, Benefit and Service Branch. With that, welcome all, and I will turn the floor over to Mr. Dompierre for 5 minutes.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us this opportunity to discuss our report on the Canada Child Benefit, which was tabled in Parliament on February the 25th, 2021. Joining me today are the principal responsible for the audit, Philippe Legoff, and Lucie Dupree, who led the audit team. The Canada Child Benefit provides a non-taxable monthly payment to eligible families based on their net family income. In the 2019-2020 fiscal year, the program allocated $24.5 billion to parents in Canada who were responsible for 5.9 million children under the age of 18. The benefit is a key public policy tool for reducing inequalities and poverty among low-income families. Overall, we found that the Canada Revenue Agency ensured that the payments to millions of eligible families were accurate and timely. The agency had effective systems and processes to assess the eligibility of recipients. However, we found opportunities to improve the program's efficiency and to prevent its misuse. For example, requiring proof of birth at the time of application for children under the age of 11 months who were born in Canada is something which would help agency staff to verify a family's eligibility.
Sometimes lacked the latest information when it determined applicants' eligibility for the program and when it calculated payments. For example, in some of the sample we analyzed, we found that the agency was not always informed of changes such as when a recipient left Canada. Payments continued until the agency received updated account information or until a parent ceased filing a Canadian income tax return. Our audit also examined the one-time payment made to support more families at the beginning of the pandemic in May 2020. We found that the modified formula extended the benefit to an additional 265,000 families. The one-time payments were found to be accurate. Finally, we found that the female presumption concept presented a challenge for the administration of the program, especially because of the diversity of families in Canada today. According to the program's condition, benefit payments go to the parent who is the primary caregiver. By law, the primary caregiver is presumed to be the female parent. We found that in some cases, the parent who in reality had the primary responsibility for the care of the child did not receive the payment initially. In our view, the administration of the program would gain in efficiency by enhancing its procedures and communications to mitigate the confusion and sensitivities caused by this concept. The Canada Revenue Agency agreed with both of our recommendations. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. Now we will go to Mr. Hamilton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about the Canada Revenue Agency's action plan on Report 4, the Canada Child Benefit, of the 2021 reports of the Auditor General of Canada. I'm accompanied by 3 colleagues who you've already introduced. Dans la Report 4, la vérification.
In Report 4, the Auditor General of Canada found that the agency was managing the Canada Child Benefit Program in a way that ensured accurate and timely payments to millions of eligible families. The OAG also found that the CRA could improve the administration of the CCB program by better managing the information used to assess eligibility for the program. Within that context, the Auditor General of Canada made 2 recommendations to the CRA, which we accepted.
We made recommendations to improve the administration of the CCP program, which included updating the list of documents used to assess eligibility, requiring proof of birth for all applicants, and greater collaboration with other government departments to ensure eligibility of applicants. Secondly, the Auditor General recommended that although the female presumption concept is a legislative requirement under the Income Tax Act, the CRA should enhance its procedures and communications to mitigate any confusion associated with this concept. L'Agence a accepté les 2 recommandations.
The CRA has agreed with both recommendations and has advanced a detailed action plan that has been shared with the committee that includes associated timelines in order to implement the recommendations. I am pleased to report that the CRA is acting on both recommendations.
First recommendation, the CRA conducted a thorough review of its online documents, training materials, and other procedures to ensure that Canadians are better informed about the documents required to apply for this benefit, and will require all training materials to be updated by the end of June of this year. Additionally, by the end of July of next year, in order to conduct a comprehensive review and meet annual spring publishing deadlines, the CRA will ensure that 2 key documents, the RC 66, Canada Child Benefits Application, and the Program and Eligibility Guide T4114, the Canada Child Benefit and related provincial and territorial programs, as well as Canada.ca web pages, are updated to reflect these changes. The CRA will conduct a review to be completed by the end of December of this year to determine the benefits and risks of the recommendation to provide proof of birth for all CCB applications. And finally, by the end of July 2021, the CRA will consult with Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada in order to determine the feasibility of receiving citizen information of CCB applicants. En ce qui concerne la recommandation 2,
with respect to Recommendation 2, by the end of December 2021, the CRA will complete a review of its materials and will update the aforementioned 2 key documents, as well as various Canada.ca web pages, so as to ensure that applicants understand who the CRA considers to be the primary caregiver of a child, what is required for an applicant to prove that they are the primary caregiver, and that only 1 payment per household can be issued.
I just want to highlight the importance of the CCB. In fact, in the 2019-20 fiscal year, as Mr. Dompierre mentioned, this important program allocated $24.5 billion to 3.3 million families in Canada and 5.9 million children. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm now happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you very much. I appreciate both of your statements. We will now move into our first round of questioning, which is a 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses today, and thank you for doing the important work during these trying times during a pandemic to make sure the taxpayers' dollars are spent wisely, and any improvements on the system is much appreciated from everybody. My questions, first off, you touched on that there's 265,000 new families that were receiving payments with the top-up. I got a question along those lines, and also if there has been increased usage because of people's incomes have been down due to COVID-19. So two-part question. I'm not sure who to ask first, but is that the reason why there's been more families, over 250,000 new families receiving benefits?
I could go, Madam Chair.
Is the chair there, please?
We seem to have lost a chair. Perhaps the vice chair, Mr. Longfield, could assist for the moment.
Sorry. I was on another track. I will assist. I think that was directed to Mr. Hamilton, was it, Mr. Tucker?
Yes, I believe whoever would like to answer it.
Okay.
And I would like my 6 minutes, full 6 minutes added.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to take a stab at that, although I think Mr. Dompierre indicated he wanted to, so he may come in after me. Yes, there was a special top up to the CCB as a result of the pandemic. And I think at the first part of your question, or maybe the second part as well, was why did we see an increase in the number of families that were eligible for this? And that is really an arithmetic issue. The amount was raised, $300, but the income thresholds at which it is clawed back did not change. So as a result, as the maximum amount was ground down to reflect higher incomes, there were a group of people, 264,000, who normally wouldn't have received the CCB, but did receive it because of the enhanced value. I'm not aware of any statistics relating to the incomes during the pandemic and whether that caused any effect. Perhaps one of my colleagues does, but I'd have to get back to the committee on that one.
And of that, just a follow-up question on, so what is the maximum that one family could earn because of the bring down that ceiling? What would be the maximum that a family would earn before with receiving that payment?
Maybe I'll turn it to my colleague, Mr. Vermaten, to give you the specifics of what it was as a result of that enhanced level. I don't have that number at my fingertips.
I'm sorry, I don't have that statistic at my fingertips. People with quite a bit higher income could get a small amount of the CCB as a result of this. I will say, with respect to your question on did the lower incomes of COVID affect CCB entitlements? And the answer is generally no, because currently the CCB is based on the amounts people are getting is based on their 2019 income. And then starting in July, it's going to be based on their 2020 income. So we should probably see in 2020 that when we have processed those returns and that flows through into CCB payments, to the extent that people receive lower amounts, that's where they're going to see the higher CCB amounts.
Appreciate that. So the questions I would like you to get back to me on is what was that ceiling? I believe it's upwards of $300,000 that people could be receiving a payment, but if you could confirm the max amount that they could earn and still qualify the program, I'd much appreciate it. And on the train of thought of increased people receiving payments, and you made reference to some of the fraudulent efforts that or anti-fraudulent efforts that you were studying on there. Do we know as a percentage how many people have been rejected that have been applied for benefits? Either percentage or total number of families.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'll respond. As a general comment on that, we're still doing our analysis of how much people might have received, and this would apply to all benefits where they weren't eligible for them, whether it be fraud or something else. We will only really have a good estimate of that once we get all of the 2020 income tax data in, and the filing deadline has just passed, so that process will be completed. But at this stage, we don't have estimates of that amount. With respect to the CCB, the subject of this meeting, again, I'm not aware that there would be a very big number of people that might have received payments that were ineligible for it, because it is an existing, it's not a new program. But so we will have more information on ineligible payments as we get through processing the 2020 tax returns.
If you could get back to me on that number, and also on the efforts to actually collect on the fraudulent claims of people that have been caught to be receiving payments, that would be much appreciated. Is there any common themed on the fraudulent cases, as in geographically, or is there any common analysis done on typical behaviors that increase fraud?
A very short answer.
Well, I think that if we're talking about the CCB program, I'm not aware of any analysis of common themes, et cetera. I would confirm that with one of my colleagues, and if possible, I suppose we could come back to the committee afterwards with numbers. But I think for this program, I would be surprised if it was a very big number.
Thank you
very much, guys.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chalker, Mr. Hamilton. We will now go to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone here to discuss a more positive report that found the CCB eligibility was well managed, and more importantly, that benefit payments were accurate and timely. Thank you. My first question is to Mr. Dom Pierre. The Auditor General found the CRA has effective systems and processes in place to assess the eligibility of Canada Child Benefit recipients. Could you please elaborate on the nature of these processes and how they make the CCB program more effective?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. So as indicated, the CRA has effective systems and process to assess the eligibility. When we, for example, visited the tax centers, we saw first level agents in action that was sort of collecting the information and entering the information in the system in order to ensure that the applications were meeting the eligibility criteria. We also saw that as part of the sample that we reviewed, that the agency had also a process in place to make sure that the payments, the amount of the payments that were made in the context of the net income tax family revenue of the family was meeting the requirement. So we saw a number of controls that were put in place by the agency in order to ensure that eligibility was met, as well as the payments were made in an accurate way. We did see some opportunities to improve some of the process to make the program better and to ensure that the program integrity was respected.
So you mentioned that some of the agents took more liberty to verify information, which led to better authentication. Do we have any tracking to see if how much improvements resulted from that?
So as you, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So as you indicated, as we visited those tax centers where these benefits were being administered, we saw that in some case, agents took the initiative to further validate the information that was being presented or provided as part of the application. This was not something that was done systematically for all of the benefits that were administered. We did not sort of see any specific issues around that step. We felt that this additional step was definitely adding to the process and supporting the agents as they were doing their review of the applications.
In terms of the female presumption concept, what were some of the difficulties resulting from that? And how can we fix this or mitigate the confusion and sensitivities caused by this concept?
Thank you for the question again, Madam Chair. As I indicated in my opening statement, we found that the program is the female presumption program concept present a challenge for the administration, not just for the agency, but also for the applicant. There seemed to be sometimes confusion around who is the primary caregiver. By law, the primary caregiver is presumed to be the female parent. Unless this clause is rebutted, then in this case, the male parent could be also the person that is entitled to get specifically the payment. But sometimes we saw in the sample that we reviewed, there was some confusion to identify who was the primary caregiver, and sometimes the amount that should have been given to that person was not done at the initial point.
Right, but how can we make those changes to lessen the confusion?
So basically, we made a recommendation to the agency for them to enhance some of the procedures and also the communication. We saw that in some case, the letters that were communicated to the applicants was convoluted and confusing, and it was not always clear what were the steps that an applicant needed to take in order to be able to be receiving the amount due.
Mr. Hamilton, could you maybe expand on those points?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. What I would say here, as was mentioned, this is a feature of the legislation, so we administer it on the basis of the legislation. We are looking at two things to do to help reduce the confusion that the Auditor General referenced. First is to make sure that we're properly training our people and they understand. And that would be one way to make sure that we're applying it in a way that's consistent and clear for the recipient. And secondly, to make sure that we improve our communication to those recipients so that when somebody is applying for the benefit and they go through the process, they understand how this female presumption rule works, and more importantly, how it affects the benefits that they're applying for. So I guess we're looking at, in a sense, communication on two fronts: one, internally to our employees to make sure that it's clear, and secondly, for the recipient to make sure that it's clear.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yip and Mr. Hamilton. We will now move to Mr. Blanchette-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Donc, je prends un moment pour saluer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to take a moment to greet the witnesses here today. And my first question is for Mr. Dompierre. Hello, Mr. Dompierre, Assistant Auditor General. Welcome to the committee. It's a rare opportunity to talk to you because Madam Wogan is used to coming to all of our work for many months now. So it's a pleasure to welcome you here. So I imagine that the ARC officers are relieved to read your report. It's your devoted and rigorous work helps ensure that public coffers are respected. So I think when there's good news, we have to mention it. But I think that you talked about a certain impression of doubt about your finding regarding the female presumption concept. Well, clearly in the CCB, I understand that this is something, but I wonder about the discomfort in terms of today's reality, such that a child could have two daddies or two mummies. The agency has already entrenched your conclusion So I would like to understand in your recommendations, from your observations and your comments, do you think that there are similar situations that could be avoided if criteria were broadened at the Revenue Agency? I'm thinking about spousal payments in situations where, you know, the civil status isn't always clear. Thank you very much for your question, Chair. We're happy to be here to talk about the report, which is quite a positive one in terms of the agency. In terms of your actual question, the female presumption concept is something that's still justified today. We're not calling into question that notion. Of course, women tend to earn less than men in the labor market, and the financial assistance provided to them does help them financially to be able to raise their children. What we found was that the law states that the female presumption concept is the starting point for determining who the benefit should be paid to. Given the diverse nature of families that are reconstituted today, this does lead to certain challenges for the agency and also, of course, for the applicants to be able to understand at what point they are entitled to obtaining the payments. We noted, as I've already said, that there may be issues in terms of communications and in terms of the procedures, that the agency should change these to be able to be clearer in terms of this existing concept, to be sure, therefore, that the primary caregiver of a child or children is the person who's receiving the amounts that are due. Thank you, Mr. Dompierre, for your clarifications. You also mentioned in your report that some information that the agency had was outdated or was in some way lacking or inaccurate. Do you think that this is something that should be looked into at the agency to ensure that fraud and identity theft are not being camouflaged in this program? Thank you for your question, Chair. As I mentioned, we noted that the amounts were also, any amounts missing were paid back. There were opportunities to improve the integrity of the program. For example, sometimes we noted in our sample that a few months had gone by before the information that was changed in the file was conveyed to the agency so that we could determine whether there was eligibility and to determine whether a payment was to be made. Let's say a couple separated and now they have shared custody or full custody. The agency has to review the program every year, and there could be some delays in order to properly manage the payments and determine the amounts and eligibility. So what could happen could be that there could be overpayments or underpayments. The person who receives overpayments would have to pay back the amount, or the agency would have to pay in order to meet the amounts that ought to have been paid in the case of someone who was underpaid. Thank you. So in other words, if the file information is not up to date, there could be people who might no longer be eligible but could still be receiving the money. Thank you again for the question. Of course, as we've indicated in the report, there are some issues in terms of exchanges between the agency and federal departments. For example, if somebody leaves Canada permanently, it would be a good idea for the agency to know about this. In that situation, the agency doesn't know about it and continues to make the payments. When the parent no longer fills in an income tax form, an income tax return, that's when we see that there may have been overpayments that will have to be collected. Mr. Dompierre, in your report, you said that people who are ineligible for benefits could cost up to $100,000 per child. How did you come up with that sum?
Mr. Dompierre.
Yep, merci pour la question à nouveau.
Thank you again for the question. for one child in a family at birth up until that child is 18 years old. We estimated the total amount, as mentioned in the report, that would be approximately $100,000.
Thank you very much. We will go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you. And I would agree with the previous speaker, my friend, Ms. Yip, that is good to have a report before us highlighting, I think, a successful program, one that delivered for many Canadians across the country in a time of need, and has, I think very little controversy in terms of my preliminary overview of the report. I do want to zero in, though, on some of the processing questions, right? So in section 4.32, it states that first level agents in the CRA were required to complete the initial processing of the benefits application in about 5 minutes, which is, of course, a very limited time. And they were expected to enter information from a paper application into an electronic database. It says the system logic then made the decision whether to approve the application, deny it, or refer the application to a higher level for further assessment. Why are the agents expected to complete the initial processing in 5 minutes? Is this a reasonable time, or could it lead to errors in inputting information?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to respond to that, although one of my colleagues may want to supplement my answer. I think that the reference in the Auditor General's report to 5 minutes, is it reasonable or is it not reasonable? My sense is if you couple it together with the conclusion of the report, which is that we were able to administer and make the payments in a timely and accurate way, I think we are allowing our agents adequate time to make an initial assessment or a more detailed one if that's required. So we don't feel that we are not giving them enough time. But obviously, as part of our review of the program, we will look at this to see if there's anything that we should be doing at the front end, both in terms of training, maybe making sure people are clear as to the processes so that they can continue to get payments out on an accurate, timely basis, and maybe even improve the process.
Is there any idea through you, Madam Chair, on how many Canadians were eligible but did not apply for this? How much was left on the table in terms of who might be eligible in preliminary policy reviews versus who actually applied for it?
I'll take that again, Madam Chair, but I will ask my colleague Frank Vermaeten or one of the others to respond. I think we feel quite confident that we have good outreach and education to make people aware of these benefits, the Canada Child Benefit being one. But it is an ongoing challenge that we try to make sure we're improving the awareness so that people file returns and become eligible for these benefits. So whether it's in vulnerable communities or where have you, we know that there are some people out there that aren't filing to get the benefits. And we have an ongoing work program to try to improve our communication, improve our outreach to make sure that we maximize the utilization of these benefits that people are eligible for, should be receiving. But in terms of how many are out there, I'm not sure that we would have that figure, but I'll ask Frank if he wants to add anything.
Yeah, thank you. It's difficult to determine exactly how many people are not applying, but what we do have, and I think this is really important, is the automated system at birth, that when we have newborn children, they work with the hospitals, the people there, to automatically provide us that information. So you get an extremely high take-up rate for those individuals, and so more than 97% of children are registered right at birth through that process. So we have a very high take-up rate. Of course, we have recent immigrants or people maybe who hadn't applied in the past. Those individuals, that becomes a more manual process. And there
Just, I don't want to get too stuck on the process. Through you, Madam Chair, I want to get on the outcomes. And so is it ever the case, in Hamilton, for instance, we help thousands of people process their taxes through our office, through our constituency office, in a voluntary tax program. And I'm just wondering, has there been any analysis or policy discussions around what automatic tax filing for fixed income people might do in terms of unlocking this? Because I can share with you in Hamilton, there's an estimated $30 million a year that go unclaimed in social service supports, including Ontario Works and ODSP and a whole host of others. When I think about programs like GIS, OAS, and this, of course, child tax benefit, and I'm wondering if there's been any policy discussions on what having automated tax filings for fixed income folks might look like to help streamline this critical support for people.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll take a stab at that. Yes, it is an ongoing area that we're looking at. Indeed, in the speech from the throne, there was a reference to could we have automated tax filing to make it easier for people to get their benefits. I would just say we have a few mechanisms in place that help on this front. I think you mentioned the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program, the CVITP, which helps people fill out their tax return and, if eligible, to receive benefits. We also have File My Return, which is a phone-based system. And we are looking at other options, including automated filing, to see how that new technique could help in this area to make sure that people are aware and are filing so that they are eligible for their benefits. So we have a few things in place, but that issue of automated filing is one that we're looking at.
That's encouraging. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. We will now go to our next round of questioning, starting with Mr. Lawrence for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And first off, I would join my colleagues in congratulating you, Mr. Hamilton, and your team on a really, I would say, an A+ report from the Auditor General. So well done. My questions will be to you, Mr. Hamilton, and maybe some of your team for support. I am curious. So we've got the automated benefit applications, which said, I think I heard someone say that they're 97% of the newborns are caught by that. But we still have 250,000 applications that are either done online or by mail-in applications. Obviously, I would suspect that that is more expensive for the taxpayer and obviously more challenging for the parents. Could you explain to me why almost half of them are still a manual process, as it were?
Madam Chair, maybe I will turn to my colleague, Mr. Vermaten, to respond to that question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. As I said, with respect to newborns, they are automatically registered. Many of the individuals that then are signing up later in the process tend to be recent immigrants or where there is a change in the custody situation, or perhaps a death, or perhaps a divorce, or a new marriage, etc. So in that case, there's really no automatic way for us to do this. We do need to get information. And so there's applications, and individuals have various avenues, whether it's an electronic base avenue, which they can use to register, or paper-based. So we need to do that for those that aren't registered at birth.
Okay, just following up on that, especially for our newcomers, which I mean, our newcomers face all sorts of challenges, sometimes new languages, new cultures, all sorts of new paperwork they have to get done. Is there any way we could tie this system into their immigration filing? I assume a lot of this information would have to be given at the time of entry into our country, and that way we're making sure that we're really reaching out our hand to newcomers and not making their life more difficult. Would that be possible or no?
I think there is certainly what happens now is that the immigrant support groups are really helpful in that regard, helping individuals fill out those various forms for all kinds of programs, be they federal, provincial, and certainly there's a lot of attention given to the CCB, given how important it is. Automating that process with respect to information sharing on that, I think something we could consider. It is often challenging, that type of information system across departments.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's something that, of course, I'm a huge proponent of. If we can invest in infrastructure to help automate these things, especially, like I said, for newcomers, all the struggles that they face coming to a new country, new culture, potentially new language, let's make it as easy as we can. So that would be something that I would put to your way. The other area where you touched upon, where there are manual, what I'll call manual applications, I know that some of them are online, but is for different custody arrangements. I'm just throwing this out here, and I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea. I just want to know whether it's possible. Would it be possible, as families become, the definition of family becomes more fluid, even custody arrangements are looked at more fluidly, as opposed to sole custody or no custody, partial custody, and those type of arrangements are sort of changing. Would it be possible to have the child benefit per individual, as opposed to the per family? And what would be some of the downfalls and perhaps some of the positives? So we don't have to change this constantly when custody changes, as family breakdown, unfortunately, is more and more common in today's society.
Yeah, well, as you're aware and it has been discussed, we do have the female presumption rule. So that is in legislation. So the way the system works right now is that it does go to one individual, but there can be situations where amounts are split depending on the custody arrangement. So certainly that's possible, and that's a policy decision that would have to be made by the Department of Finance. It certainly has pros and cons, but I'd say generally the female presumption rule, while there are certainly cases where that becomes difficult, it has a lot of advantages in terms of simplicity and clarity and supporting those individuals that in the majority of cases are the ones that are the primary caregivers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Vermaeten. We will now go to Mr. Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for a very engaging discussion we're having at our committee today. I'd like to start with Mr. Dampierre. I noted in 4.6 of the audit, there was mention made of the United Nations sustainability goals, that the Canada Child Benefit Program supports the goal of no poverty, which is goal 1 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's the first time I can recall that really being spelled out in terms of the United Nations goals. In previous testimonies, we've asked about using the sustainability goals from the United Nations as part of our audit planning process. Is this something new that this would appear in background? Is this going to be an ongoing that we should look forward to?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So indeed, it will be something that will be coming more often in our reports. The Auditor General has asked me and our teams, as we plan our audits, to put a lens on the Sustainable Development Goals. Equivalent as well, I just wanted to add on the Gender-Based Analysis Plus as well. This is also something that we are asking our teams to look into specifically. So yes, you will be seeing in the future more and more of mention of those United Nations goals that have been that the Canada has agreed to.
Thank you, and that's great news and great work. 4.7 mentions auditing vulnerable populations and looking into that. And this past weekend, I was at an anti-Black racism summit put on by the Guelph Black Heritage Society, and one of the presenters talked about policies being developed for property owning individuals versus non-property owning individuals as an example of how systemic racism can leach its way into policies. How are you looking at getting into more vision on vulnerable populations? I'm thinking, and I'll also start with you, Mr. Dampierre, and then go over to Mr. Hamilton, because I'm interested that CRA is actually developing a lot of our social supports, whether it's the Canada Child Benefit or the Climate Action Incentive or the GIS. We're reaching into vulnerable populations through CRA, and automatic filing was one of the issues, but how would you actually try to define the vulnerable people in Canada and work with them? Mr. Dampierre.
Thank you for the question. So the first thing we ask the entity is, have they conducted a GBA plus analysis? Have they looked into those vulnerable population, or are they considering every potential population in their segment that would be benefiting from the program? So we would start to question the department in that sense. And I believe there's an obligation from a program perspective that they should have a GBA analysis being conducted. Thank you for raising this paragraph. I wanted to jump in earlier, but this is something that was also we had seen in the audit work that we did, and we did plan an audit to be conducted, and we are currently in the process of doing that audit. We are in the process of scoping that audit, and we will, in the next year, come back to Parliament and come back to this committee to discuss the results of these outreach activities within the government.
Thank you, because sometimes we look at micro parts of policies, but we lose sight of the big picture of trying to help vulnerable people. So tremendous that you're working in that area. I'm looking forward to seeing what that audit comes forward with. Mr. Hamilton, in terms of the CRA, when I've worked with, Mr. Green mentioned the volunteer tax clinics. We have many that we work with through our office as well. And I really see them as leading us into supporting vulnerable people, particularly the people that we're serving through those tax clinics. But then there would be others. Our by name list in Guelph has 134 homeless people on it. How do we reach to those people? And the CRA as an agent for social change isn't something we normally think of the CRA. Could you maybe comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It is an interesting question that you raise. You know, while people typically think of us as a tax collector, or some people do, not everybody, there's actually a significant part of our activity which is also delivering benefits both at the federal and provincial level. So one of the issues that we come up against, and I referenced it earlier, and the Auditor General will be helping us, is how confident are we that people are engaging with the tax and benefit system, either filing returns or claiming the benefits that they're entitled to. And so we outreach into specific communities. We've had a pilot project with Indigenous communities to have a simplified tax form. As you mentioned, the Community Volunteer Program, which is a very effective program. It had a little bit of difficulty through the pandemic because of the restriction on in-person meetings, but we found a way to do some of that virtually. So we're always looking for different ways that we can make sure people are aware of what they're entitled to and their obligations.
Thank you very
Madam
much.
Chair.
You're welcome. Now we will go to our 2.5-minute round, starting with Mr. Blanchette-Jonca.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question would be for Mr. Hamilton. Hello, Mr. Hamilton. Welcome to the committee. It's always a pleasure to have you here. I'm sure that you were listening to my intervention with Mr. Dompierre. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the female presumption concept being currently applied in the payment of the CCB. I understand that you've accepted the Auditor General's recommendation. Could you enlighten us here at the committee about what it was that led the agency to review its rules and do the follow-up?
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it was an issue for us. As we've mentioned, this is a part of the Act, and so we have to respect what the law says. Generally, we focused on two aspects. Are the rules and procedures clear to employees? Are employees sufficiently trained? Do they have the necessary training? And is the communication clear enough? And for taxpayers or the benefit recipients, is it clear to them? Are the rules clear? Because as Mr. Vermonten said, sometimes there are complexities in a relationship between two parents, and we have to be able to very clearly explain what the rules are and the ways in which the benefits can be shared or in which the payment would be given to one party or the other. So it's a question for us because we have a people-first philosophy, And this is an objective of all of our programs, to ensure clear communication. And of course, respecting the Act. Thank you for these clarifications. There's something else of concern to me, and that's the accuracy of information. This is something that raised some concern in the mind of the Auditor General. Can you confirm that you have the moral assurance that all of your mechanisms will ensure that there is no fraud and that this is avoided by the accuracy of taxpayer information, so as to be sure that the agency is paying the proper sums, and that if there is anything that is done incorrectly, this will be pursued?
Mr. Hamilton, it will have to be a very short answer.
We, Madam Chair.
Yes, Chair. Sometimes there is a change in relationship between two parents, and sometimes, from time to time, it takes longer for the agency to receive the information about the change. We're continuing to improve the process so as to be able to have information that is recent. There's always going to be a delay. And after that, we would be able to recover the amounts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. We will now go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I always appreciate your gentle hand in guiding the conversation on to the next round. Listen, I have some real concerns about the tax filing dates, the reports that we're hearing from accountants and from the voluntary tax clinics across the country. So my question is, last year when the tax filing deadline was extended, did you notice an impact on people receiving the CCB payments? And acknowledging that there is no extension in the foreseeable future for this extended period, do you consider that to also be a disruption in the delivery of this program?
Madam Chair, I'll take that question. In fact, as you referenced, one of the reasons that we like to have the filing deadline as early as possible is to give us some time to review and assess the benefits that are due to be paid before the start of the new benefit year in July. So we now have the filings in, and we're in that process, and we think that gives us maximum chance to make sure that people get the benefits they're eligible for, rather than have them discontinued for a period of time while we go forward. I think last year,
just to be clear on that point, through you, Madam Chair, I only have 2.5 minutes. We used to do, and when I mean like voluntary tax clinic, our office processed up to 5,000 tax applications a year. This year, we're only going to do about 1,500. I'm going to presume that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Canadians who are not going to get their tax filings in on time. Have you seen a decrease in applications compared to previous years? Or are you suggesting that we're on par with like numbers year to date?
Madam Chair, I'll provide a general response to that, but maybe my colleague, Mr. Vermaten, will have more precise numbers. But I would say overall, we see roughly the same number of tax filings in as we would have in a normal year at this time. So I'll maybe look to Frank to confirm that. But
before can you also include, would CERB create a disruption to this in any way for people?
CERB in what way? Sorry, just for
in the ways
of
people's eligibility, or has the increase in the eligibility accounted for that?
I'd have to defer to my colleague to answer that question. So maybe Frank, or we can get back to the committee on any impact that the CERB may have had on people's eligibility for CCB.
I'm happy to get that in writing, as I know my time is up and the chair is about to gently nudge us along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. And thank you, Mr. Hamilton. We would be happy to receive that in writing. We will now move to our next round of questioning. It's a 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Tucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just generally, I'm very supportive of the CCB. I think it's a great program that lets families choose how to spend those dollars, what's right for their family. But there is concerns, as in the report, is looking at somewhat the risks associated with the program. And I can't think of a bigger risk that is going to be facing future governments is inflation. So you mentioned in the backgrounder that the benefit is tied to the inflation. And I was just wondering if it wasn't mentioned in the report, but I was just wondering why, if you did look at it, wasn't included, or if you have any comments about what would an inflation rate of 3%, 5%, even worst case, be on the cost of the program.
So I'm not sure if this is directed to me, Madam Chair, but I'll just maybe, I'll ask maybe my colleague, Philippe Le Goff. I don't believe we have had sort of a review of that specifically. We did mention at the beginning of the report and the introduction in the context that the payments were indexed. So there is sort of a clause there that is supporting that. So we did not specifically.
Are the thresholds also tied to inflation?
I believe so, but I'll turn to my colleague, Philippe Le Goff. He would be in a better position to provide some details on that if he has any. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, we did not look specifically at any question related to the viability of the program for the long term, nor inflation. So I will defer the question maybe to the CRA.
Okay. Well, if someone can get back to me if there is an answer on what that would look like. I got limited time here, so I'm just going to go on to the next concern that I have is on the retro pay, and just confirmation on how far back could you go on the retro pay to either top up the individual and or hopefully if it was an overpayment, receive dollars back to the Treasury.
Perhaps, Madam Chair, I'll ask one of my colleagues to take on that question of how far back we can go.
Sure. Generally speaking, the rule is that you can go back 10 years with respect to making a retroactive payment.
And on the ones that we've overpaid and then left the country, is it fair to assume that our success rate of receiving any dollars back is very limited?
I don't have any statistics on that. Perhaps my colleague, Mr. Lemieux, would have that available at his fingertips. I doubt it, but could ask him.
No, unfortunately, I don't have that at my fingertips, but we could look into the data, see if we have any statistics on that.
Another area of my concern for families are, unfortunately, with the divorce rates and the breakdown of the families, couples are terrible to each other during that time period. And if one member fails to file their income tax, is it correct on how I read the report, then the actual payment doesn't get processed?
So Madam Chair could take part of that question. It is sort of as you referred in the report. We indicate that either one or both would need to be filing their tax return in order for these payments to be made.
So on that example, I guess it could go on. If 10 years is the retro part, hopefully they file before then, and then whoever has the custody of the child would get those dollars back. If I'm understanding the program correctly.
That is my understanding as well, Madam Chair. So I would say that the agent would need to do some further analysis in terms of chronology of events of when the custody or when the parents were sharing that custody, or if it was one parent that had the sole responsibility of the child. But I think that's a question that maybe would be better directed to the agency in terms of those specificity.
Fabulous. And
maybe, oh, okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to start to respond, Madam Chair, to that question, but I think I would turn to my colleagues for the very specific rules in that case. But just a general comment that, in administering this program, we have to recognize some of the complexities in the relationships, in the changes that happen. As you say, somebody could leave the country. And although we don't have statistics on how much we can get back there, I think it's fair to say that it doesn't increase our chances of recouping that money. And then similarly, I was just going to say that in the situation of a breakup, that can often be a case where the two parties don't agree, and that can be more complex for us to work our way through. But we do try to work our way through that.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to Mr. Sorbera for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Quick question on page 4 of the Auditor General's report to the CRA officials. If you can just explain the difference between automated benefit applications and benefits online applications, please, very quickly, succinctly.
Okay, well, you probably got your best chance of getting a simple answer from me, so I will start, Madam Chair. I think for the automated benefit application, that is something I think Mr. Vermaten referred to it earlier, that we automatically register upon birth, and that applies in all provinces and one territory. And an online application is where you do it, either through my account or on the website. So that would be the difference between those two. One is automatic on birth, and the other is you could apply. Some people call it automatically, but you have to go through a web source.
Of course, and then moving on from that, but related to that, the number of mail-in applications for the last period, and as you know, I'm a big proponent of digitization. The number of mail-in applications is still 154,000 for the last reported period for the fiscal year 1920. How can the CRA, working with all the government departments, because what we want to get to is, we're working on the unique single identifier number with ESDC, and that's in the budget, and that's what we've talked about that at committee here. There's EP roll, that's a pilot on that, a project on that. How can we get these mail-in applications to be moved on either an online applications or automatically? For example, the Canada Workers Benefit, that's an online benefit in different respect, but that's automatically done when you file your taxes. How do we get these mail-in applications to get them online digitally? So even if I can go to my CRA account, log in, and I know there's my CCB or my UC identifier number, how can we get these eliminated and moved online?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that is a tremendous preoccupation for us at the agency. And I think, to be fair, we should say that we've had a lot of success in this. We have over 90% of tax filings submitted electronically. And I think from our perspective, we're trying to do everything we can to make it as simple as possible for people to do it electronically. I think one of the issues we have to recognize is, some people are just not comfortable doing it electronically. They like paper. And we also have to pay attention to those because we don't want to leave anybody behind. But we are taking more of an incentive approach rather than mandating it, for example, and saying, let's make it as attractive as possible for people. And we're going piece by piece through the agency to look for areas where we can improve on that front, because it is going to be important for the future. Much more efficient, fewer errors.
Absolutely. And I think I'd rather have those hardworking call center agents that I met when I was in Winnipeg as the PS and saw what they're doing, more helping folks directly as in terms of front counter service, if I can use that term, rather than just processing the mail-in applications, which they do in a very, very efficient manner. My last question is relating to that. We know over about 12% of Canadians do not file their taxes in Ontario. The number I've seen is around 15%. They tend to be our most vulnerable in society. The only way you can collect a family or an individual with child can collect the CCB is if they file their taxes. Can we briefly touch upon what the time we have in terms of the progress in ensuring that Canadians who are eligible and their family members receive the CCB?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And as we discussed earlier, a component of this, we do have a concern about the number of people that don't file and would be eligible for benefits. And that's part of a bigger issue for us. We want to see people filing wherever possible. But it's a particular case where they're not filing, and by not doing that, they become ineligible for the benefits. So we've had a push, talked about a few of the elements. There's obviously the community volunteer program, which provides a trustful place where people can go and have their forms done. We do a lot of outreach all across the agency, across the country. We have groups that are going out to talk to vulnerable populations and to increase awareness. And I think the last thing that we need to do is make it as easy as possible for people to do it. And, in some cases, maybe that means simplifying a form or making our website more easy to navigate. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing. And as well, looking at newcomers into the country to make sure that they can process the information that we have to be able to get the benefits they're entitled to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorbera. Your time is up. We will now move into our next round of questioning. It's a 6-minute round. Both colleagues and witnesses, I would just remind you that there is a time frame. I think I have consistently allowed us to go over time, but in order to get that time back, I would just ask that you would keep your questions and your answers as succinct as possible so that we can get as many in as possible. We will now move to Mr. Berthold for 6 minutes.
Merci. J'ai finalement trouvé le...
Thank you. I finally found the unmute button. Madam Chair, I'd like to add my voice to my colleagues in congratulating the CRA for their work with the CCB. I think that, as Koritaka said, I think that this is a very efficient program, and it's good that it's well run. So congratulations to you and all of the government officials. And it's nice to be able to say that you recognize this, you merit this recognition. So thank you. Mr. Dompierre, my question is for you. In your opening comments, you mentioned in your second paragraph that this benefit is a public policy instrument that's essential to fight against inequalities and poverty in low-income families. But there is no comparison, and you've made no allusion to that statement in your report. Could you tell me why you felt it appropriate to mention this in your opening comments? Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. In the current context, I think that we wanted to underscore this point. This program is to assist low-income families, families who are in need. We were also inspired by the COVID situation. We looked at the issues related to the temporary amount that was allocated in the COVID context. So this was the spirit in which I added that element into my introductory words. I wanted to express that this program is well perceived and wished for by Canada's population. Well, it seems to be more of a political commentary. That's why I was wanting to convey this to you. Normally, the Auditor General's comments are very well documented and based on specific elements. It's not that I don't agree with what you said, but I was just wondering why you were saying it in this way. This is commenting on a government policy, which is more of a political or policy comment rather than a fact-based comment. So that's just the comment I wanted to make. I am not upset with you. I do find that the program is essential. But I think it was just worth mentioning this. Next, Mr. Hamilton, I wanted to talk about communication between government departments. In your action plan, I see that you're going to make efforts to improve communications with the departments. I've recently received a letter from the minister about a completely different dossier. It was the problems between Service Canada and CRA with the caregiver's benefit, where one officer from CRA has to communicate with somebody else in Service Canada so that people can get answers. Don't you think that the time has come for both organizations to just sit down and find a solution to these communication problems and these data exchange difficulties? Because I think these are things that are coming up more and more frequently. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an issue for us in general. In this program, just a moment, sorry. I think in the program we mentioned a few changes where it was necessary to have information from a different department. For example, immigration. It's important for us to recognize new arrivals as well as people who are emigrating from Canada. So we do have communication with CBSA. But is this a personal exchange from individual to individual, or can you obtain the information in an automated fashion? Well, yes, this is the point. More and more, we have an automated system, and it's necessary for both systems to talk to each other. It's not just one person from the agency and somebody else in the immigration department. So this is an issue because every system is unique in the case of two different government departments or agencies. We would hope that in the future we will gradually be able to have systems that can speak to each other. It's an issue for us. We have made a lot of progress, but there's still more that has to be done, both in terms of the future and also in terms of savings. A digital economy. So the processes are there, but we do have to improve the processes and make them more highly automated for Canadians. You're absolutely right. Do you think that the Treasury Board is sufficiently interested in this matter? Do you think that they're pushing the various government departments to have a quick solution? Treasury Board is very much interested in this topic in several areas. For the Canada Child Benefit, it's an issue, but I would imagine that it's not the most important issue, the biggest issue that the government is facing. The Treasury Board is very much aware of this subject, and we will continue to work together with the other departments.
Hamilton. Mr. Berthold, we will now go to Mr. Fergus for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to add my name to those of my colleagues congratulating the employees at CRA for the exceptional work that they have been doing in terms of being able to continue to deliver the goods to the most vulnerable families in Canada who are benefiting from the Canada Child Benefit. My questions are going to be directed to Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, and your colleagues, of course. CRA employees have worked tirelessly, as I said, from the very beginning of the pandemic. Several of them have worked from home, and they've worked long hours. And they've always placed Canadians' needs above all else. And I'm very much familiar with these people because as an MP for the National Capital Region, I have seen officials and civil servants and people working with the CRA, and I see what a terrific job they're doing. Given the situation and work from home and remote work that's happening more and more, can your department continue to reorganize its processes and increase this so that we can always be able to ensure continuity of payments for the CCB or any other services and programs that your agency is managing?
Oui, Madame Présidente.
Yes, Chair, that's a good question. I am very, very proud of the agency's employees during this time. Well, always, but in particular during the pandemic. Many people are working nearly 7 days a week. More and more working from home. rather than the office. During the pandemic, we have seen some instances where it would be possible to increase our efforts. So this has been an opportunity to do things differently in the future. So an opportunity to be more inventive in the future, or more innovative. I think the agency has been energized by this, and I think that we've done good work during the pandemic. And now we're looking into how we could do some things differently, more efficiently in the future. It's important to say something else. We have nearly completed a renewal process for our benefit system. It's a system, a big system in the agency. And because of the increase in benefits by the federal government and provincial governments, we've changed the system, updated the system so as to be able to be better in the future. As your question had suggested, we will have greater capacity in the future. Along the same lines, Mr. Hamilton, the CCB is a program that's proven itself, but we know that it's not always easy for Canadians who are the most vulnerable to access a computer, let's say, or to be sure that they can apply online. Is there any way in which we could automate or facilitate applications to be able to access the CCB, to be able to reach those people, those most vulnerable families? And can you tell us more about this? I know that I'm moving a bit away from the Auditor General's report here, but I do think that it's something that's very important just to understand your plans so as to be able to facilitate access for these kinds of benefits that are so necessary for people who are in need. Yes, Chair. As I've mentioned, this is a challenge for us for certain populations. Even if the program has had a lot of success, and even if we're able to pay out a lot of benefits to many people, there's a certain portion of the population that are just not able now or isn't, well, where people aren't aware of the program. For some people, they're not comfortable, and so with a computer. So what do we do in that kind of situation? We have a community volunteer program, and that is one way of filing. We have the File My Return. Excuse me for interrupting you. Do you think that the time has come to be able to offer a way of filing taxes or to have automatic systems for tax returns? Yes.
Hamilton.
Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Chair. We do have an auto-file system in which the agency can input the information that we have for an individual. But the challenge is in a situation where we don't have the information in our systems. But yes, we do have the capacity of inputting the information that we have at the agency into the form. But if we don't have the information, it's a challenge. And that's why we're working very hard to find new ways of making these changes for vulnerable people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, Mr. Hamilton.
Merci.
On to Mr. Blanchette-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Dompierre. Mr. Dompierre, in March 2020, the Parliament allowed the payment of a single amount of up to $300 per child to assist families in assuming the high costs of taking care of their children during the pandemic. We know that the CRA was responsible for the payment. Which department proposed this payment, and what about the eligibility requirements related to it?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Perhaps I didn't understand you correctly. When you're talking about which department that proposed it, well, it's the government that made a decision to use the program in the context of the pandemic. As you've mentioned, this is to assist families. There was a change. Changes were made to the Income Tax Act so as to make it possible to temporarily change the form so that more families would be able to receive support during the pandemic. Now, perhaps I didn't understand part of your question when you were asking about who made this decision. To my knowledge, it was a government decision, and they asked the Canada Revenue Agency to administer the amendment. My question was to know which government department proposed this measure. Perhaps I could turn to my colleague, Mr. Le Goff, to determine which department may have made that decision more specifically. Mr. Le Goff?
Bonjour, Madame.
Yes, good morning, Chair. So the sponsor would have been Employment and Social Development, but the Minister of Finance is also responsible for the Income Tax Act. So it was pretty much those two departments. Thank you for those clarifications. And a question for both of you, Messrs. Le Goff and Dompierre. I'm trying to understand what analysis you based yourselves on, or the departments based themselves on, to decide how much should be paid and to extend the program to inviting families who didn't necessarily receive the child tax benefit because their revenues were too high. Mr. Le Goff, would you answer that question? Madam Chair, we did not see any analysis in support of the additional payment. But we did not request that analysis, so perhaps it exists. Just to understand, Mr. Le Goff, according to your report, we don't know where that $300 came from. It could have been $300, it could have been $500, it could have been $700. So we have no details about how that amount ended up on the table. It was just that's the amount. That's the right amount. We have no details because this was beyond the framework of the audit, which was looking only into the eligibility and accuracy of payments. Very well. Thank you for those clarifications. Question for Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, I'd like to refer a question to you that was asked by Ms. Dubé from my writing, who had asked that there are a lot of reconstituted families, and right now for the CCB, the spouse's revenue counts in the family allowance, and this could frustrate some people. I'd like to know whether the CRA has looked into the idea of not calculating the revenue of the spouse when it's a reconstituted or blended family.
There we go. Okay. See, Madam.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I could ask my colleague to answer that question, or if this option was ever considered. I imagine that it's more of a question for the finance department, or policy or politics, a political question. Perhaps Frank or somebody else would be able to give more information.
Merci. I don't believe we specifically looked into this issue. Certainly, it would be a decision by the Department of Finance. To me, at first glance, it's not clear to me why a reconstituted family should be subject to a different rule with respect to an income test than with respect to the original family, if that's what you want to call it. But again, this is a policy decision that would have to be considered by the Department of Finance.
Merci, Monsieur Vermonten. Des précisions.
Thank you, Mr. Vermonten. I could tell you that in this case, the referral was made to the government of Quebec, which was talking about indexing support payments, and that's why the reconstituted family issue was in play. Thank you for what you added. I'd like to get back to the question involving that $100,000 amount, Mr. Dompierre, that you assessed. You told me how you calculated that amount. In other words, from the birth of a child until they were eligible for the family allowance. Is this the amounts that were paid and never recovered? Or is that $100,000 including legal costs and other costs? Thank you for the question, Chair. I don't believe that it takes into consideration all the elements that you mentioned, but I would ask Mr. Le Goff, who could maybe give you an overview of how the calculation was made.
Goff.
Madame la Présidente, la réponse.
Chair, the answer is no. This calculation only includes the amount of the benefit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blanchet-Jonquin, Mr. Goff. We will now go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Great line of questioning by my friend from the block. I appreciated hearing some of the answers to that, and trying to better understand how these decisions are made, and would love the opportunity to go beyond just the government. I think we know that it's the government that makes these decisions, but I think it'd be interesting to hear for this committee's purpose the rationale on how the higher income earners were able to access this. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I might not even use the fullness of my time, but there are some questions I have around the processing. And if this has been covered in previous questions, I do apologize. But we know that it's not always possible for families or parents to have immediate access to the traditional forms of ID or registration, especially when a parent is fleeing a harmful domestic situation. Can you explain the importance of allowing families to submit alternate documentation to prove evidence of benefit eligibility? I think this might go to Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I will turn it over to my colleagues who have more in-depth knowledge of the system. But I think the point you raise is an interesting one in the sense that there can be clear and well-defined rules for simple cases. But we, in administering the system, have to understand that life is not always simple, and things can crop up that can make things more awkward. And we have to try to have as much sensitivity as we can and flexibility to try to get the information that we need in a way that's most reasonable for the taxpayer and recipient of the benefit. But perhaps my colleagues can talk a little bit more about how that process works and what kind of flexibilities we have.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to contribute to this. So just let me give you a couple of examples that we deal with on a regular basis. You could imagine a woman in a shelter for battered women, for example, where they may not be able to go back to the house to be able to get the information they need in order to prove that they have custody or that they have the birth certificate handy to them. So in those cases, here's a woman clearly still has custody of children, needs support. And so we need to find a way to help those individuals. Or perhaps in the Indigenous context, a scenario could happen where the parents are no longer able to take care of the child and the grandmother takes custody. Again, the grandmother may be a difficult situation. Grandmother may not have access to the necessary paperwork. And again, we want to do whatever we can to ensure that the children effectively are supported. So we try to work best as we can to have a reasonable substitute and try to build on that over time. And so in that sense, in some cases, we are taking a bit of a risk. We're managing that risk and saying, well, we don't have all the right information right now, but we're willing to live with this information for a short period of time, recognizing that you're not always going to get it right. But I think in the large majority of cases, we do get it right.
If I could, in a follow-up to that, according to the OAG's report, other branches of the agency and other federal departments were likely to have information that could support a benefit application. For example, renewal of a resident card. Yet access to this information would have to be enabled to access eligibility with higher levels of confidence. Is this information not accessible due to legal restrictions on sharing information between the CRA and departments, or even between branches of the CRA? Or could this information be easily accessible?
Perhaps I could turn to my colleague, Heather Daniels, with respect to the privacy sharing rules. I think it's very case specific. In some cases, there are going to be limitations in terms of whether the other department is able to share that information. In other times, it's a system issues. Can the system talk to each other? And in other cases, I think there is definitely progress that we can make in some of these issues, as the OAG pointed out, and we're working on that on a number of fronts. Could I turn to Heather and ask her whether she wanted to contribute anything to this?
Absolutely, Heather, you have 20 seconds.
Yes,
Well, I
absolutely.
had a minute and 15 seconds, but that's okay.
I would agree. I believe Mr. Vermonten covered the scenarios. Often there is privacy issues with respect to sharing of information, so there are limitations. And in some cases, we can develop a memorandum of understanding and an MOU with another department to facilitate the process of information sharing, like we've recently done with Canada Border Services in our agreement to receive information on exit data. So we are making much progress in respect of sharing information with other departments.
My apologies, Mr. Green. You do have another 30 seconds.
I'll just take that time to again thank the staff for this program and hope that there can find better integrated approaches to both the automation of fixed income CRA tax filings so that there's no disruption on CBBs when, when in cases like COVID and other cases, it becomes disrupted because of lack of filing. And certainly look forward to them coming back at future dates with some solutions to some of these challenges that we've presented and any comments they might have in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. We will now go to our next round of questioning. It is a 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Weber.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I too would like to thank Mr. Hamilton and the CRA for a job well done here with this child benefit program and the administration of that, and the great review by the AG. Also for the detailed action plan that you have provided with the 2 recommendations of the AG and the timelines too. I had to sneak out for a good 5 minutes, so I hope this question wasn't asked, but I will ask it and you can let me know. But it's with regard to one of the AG's questions on the requirement to provide a valid proof of birth for all applications. Now, it may sound like a stupid question, but what's the purpose of that? Is it to determine citizenship of this child, or is it to prove that there is actually a child that they're in existence that they're claiming for? Is it to alleviate any type of fraud? And then the CRA, apparently in your response, you will conduct a review to determine the risks associated with the requirement to provide the valid proof of birth for all applications. What risks are there to provide a proof of birth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I'll lead off on that question. I'm not sure if my colleagues will need to jump in. But yes, in terms of determining the eligibility for the program, I mean, clearly the proof of birth is a useful piece of information to have. And I think, as Frank mentioned earlier, we have an automated system in 10 provinces and 1 territory where we automatically get the information upon birth. So that's good there. But we can't always have that in terms of people that might come into the system a little bit later, new to the country, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are looking at how big is the risk there to us. It's obviously some risk. And that's part of our study that we're going to undertake. Is there anything we can do about it if we find that there is a risk? Because for us to wait till we have absolute certainty and proof of that might not be the right outcome in certain circumstances. So yes, there is a risk. It's part of the eligibility criteria. We think it's manageable, but we also think, as the Auditor General has pointed out, it's an area we can re-examine and see how is our risk management on this issue, and is there anything we can do to get greater assurances in these cases?
Okay, you say that you are going to conduct a review on this, complete a review, and determine the benefits and the risks involved with this valid proof of birth. You hope to get that done by the end of December 2021. That's 8 months away. It's, to me, that sounds like a quite a long period of time to implement something like this in place if it's required. Just curious, why the delay?
It just on that. So to make sure I understand your question, you're saying we should be able to do it more quickly?
Yeah,
that
would be my thoughts. But
yeah, I mean, perhaps things always take a little bit longer than what people realize. We have to look at the systems. I would also and really do a risk assessment of this, like how many situations are out there, what's the length of time that we are taking, and what is really the benefits on the other side. So that analysis takes time. The only piece of context I would add in is the agency is working at full capacity at the moment, actually more than full capacity with all of the new benefits that we've introduced. And so part of what I'm trying to do as the head of the agency is to make sure we focus our attention on priority areas, but that also we manage things so that we don't overcommit and end up doing some things badly. So, hopefully we'll be able to finish it before the end of the year, but I thought that was a reasonable time frame for us to get this job done.
Yep. Thank you for that, Ben. And again, I apologize if this was asked before, but it's with regard to the shared custody and your payments to parents. Now, each parent that with shared custody will get 50% of what they would have gotten if they had full custody of the child. So the CRA, they will not split the amount using any percentages at all, or give the full amount to one of the parents in a shared custody situation. And what's the reason for that? Why can't you be flexible there? If one parent has a child for 75% of the time and the other 25, why could you not split it up 75-25?
Thank you. We have run out of time, so a very short answer.
Madam Chair, what I would propose is we just get back to you in writing on that following the meeting in terms of the flexibilities that we have or lack thereof. So I'm happy to commit to do that in writing because it may take a little while to explain.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. We will now go to Mr. Blois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll join the chorus of my colleagues that we can be a critical committee at sometimes with public accounts where we're trying to hold government to account. But this is a report that is largely positive, and I'd like to commend the CRA for their work in this file. My questions for the CRA would start with 4.23. The Auditor General Office, as part of the audit, looked at your preliminary agents that were accepting these applications and saying there would be an opportunity to expand their role beyond what it is right now to add an additional layer of verification. Just simply, is that something CRA is considering, or does it really not hit the way in which the department does its work at this point?
Madam Chair, perhaps I'll turn to my colleague to answer that. I think I would just say by way of opening that we always look for things to consider that would help improve things. How much improvement we could make here would be something I'll leave. Maybe Frank would want to comment on that.
Quickly, if possible. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just very briefly, the agents here primarily are putting in the data. They're data entry, and based on the data that's in the system, it's the IT system that then says, well, everything is there, therefore this individual is entitled. They do exercise some judgment when there's some questions on some of the documentation, and at this point, we feel for the most part this time is adequate. They do have flexibility. The amount of time they take to on average takes 5 minutes, but some cases obviously simply take longer. But we're going to look at this again to see whether there are opportunities to get the balance a little better.
Just building on that, Mr. Vermaeten, while I have you here, these applications that the agents are receiving, I presume those are applications outside of the provincial information of births that are sent to you. Is that indeed the case?
That is.
Okay, and talk to me about the information, because of course there's broader conversations going on right now about the information sharing between provinces and territories and the federal government around healthcare writ large, given the fact that we're in a pandemic. Is the information that you receive from the provinces and territories generally all in the same standard form, or does each province and territory have a bit of a different way in which they send that information to the federal government?
Generally speaking, it's very similar across provinces and territory. And this is one of the things we're working with the other two territories that aren't part of this to try to put in place those systems and the information sharing agreements to get the right information so we can be confident to give individual CCB if the hospital provides us this information.
And is all that information, just out of my own curiosity, is that coming in a digital form, all being sent to the government of Canada, or is it in paper form? How does that actually come to you?
Generally, it's in a secure digital form.
Perfect. I want to move to the late filing. I know Mr. Green had conversations around this. The Auditor General's report simply says that if an individual has not actually filed a tax return in the given year. So for example, if you're receiving in the 2020, 2021, we look back to your 2019 tax year. If I understand, I think if you haven't filed, you don't receive the benefit. Is there any recourse for individuals that may have late filings, or is it just simply if you don't file, you don't receive your benefit?
Madam Chair, if I could answer, it is not a use it or lose it approach in the sense that if you're late in filing, you just get your CCB later. So as long as an individual does file, they will get those amounts up to 10 years.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I just want to go back to Mr. Lawrence's line of questioning. He talked about, of course, new Canadians, and you know, we recognize that 50% of the applications are still coming from family situations, which are always changing. I think we can all appreciate that. Some are that weren't necessarily born in the country. I'll go back to this. Is there room where we can find efficiencies where information is shared with other departments that we can blend into the work that you're doing? Because to me, what Mr. Lawrence raised was very valid, and it was kind of, you know, the conversation was around, well, organizations in the nonprofit sector do a lot of work, but would immigration, IRCC not have a lot of this information that could be shared with CRA?
Madam Chair, there's definitely room for improvement. And as a matter of fact, we are speaking to IRCC right now and trying to figure out what kind of information sharing would be possible, what could be automated, you know, with a view to helping people as much as possible get the benefits they're entitled to.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for all your work.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blois and Mr. Vermaeten. We will now move to our 2.5-minute round, starting with Mr. Blanchette-Joncan.
Thank you, Chair. My question will be for Mr. Dompierre. Mr. Dompierre, in your opening statements, you said that CRA didn't always have the most recent information to be able to determine eligibility and to perform the necessary audits to calculate the benefits or allowances. In terms of public spending, would it be desirable to increase the number of frontline agents and officers so that they can take more time during their initial evaluation and assessment and detect ineligible people more quickly?
Madame la Présidente.
Chair, I would answer that question because Mr. Dompierre seems to have technical difficulties. In the report, we emphasize the vigilance of many of the frontline officers at the agency. And we felt that there were certain modus operandis that should be officialized. So that's an issue for the agency in terms of its own personnel management. Thank you. My question will be for the agency then. Mr. Hamilton, according to the Auditor General's report, it mentions that by having more time for processing applications, frontline officers could better authenticate information. For example, they could check whether another child has been born to the same parents in the preceding 9 months. Has the agency already assessed the additional costs that would be involved in having frontline officers do more checks and possible savings in terms of ineligible people who would be detected right from the start? Yes, Chair. A rather brief answer. This is a topic of great interest to the agency. I think we have to recognize that information sometimes isn't there, and that's why we have to work with immigration and border services agency as well. It's important for us. It's not simply a matter of having more time for individual officers at the beginning of the process. I think it's more a question of having the information, having an optimized system to be able to give us that information if anything changes. And sometimes perhaps there's a change in the relationship between the two parents. And there's a distance between the point of the event and the point at which we receive the information. That's the challenge for us.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. We will now move to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
I'm just going to open this up for Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, were there any questions that have been asked throughout the course of this testimony that you wanted to have a chance to follow up on and fully explain in a better way?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think not. I think we've touched on the main issues. I suppose if I was to say one thing, and the committee members have been very gracious with their appreciation for the good work of the agency, of which I'm tremendously proud. But we've tended to focus on the areas for improvement, which is really important, and we have an action plan. But just to remember that for the most part, this program works extremely well. We have some things that we can improve upon in terms of timeliness of information. And I think we've hit on mostly the right points here. I've come across each of the points on the action plan. So no, I don't think that anything has been missed, other than just to make sure that we don't get too focused on the areas for improvement and lose sight of the benefits, which I think the committee has done a good job of.
Well, you'll be happy to know through you, Madam Chair, the Liberal government always does a good job touting the things that go well within their programs. So I have no doubt in my mind that we'll hear about this through many House of Commons interventions and press releases and departmental communications. So I think that that's great. But I'll share with you, just in close, that to come to this committee and to have a unanimous kind of overwhelming support for a report is something that is not always the case. And so consider yourself well praised within the context of this committee. Those are all the comments that I have for this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. We will now go to our last round of questioning. It is a 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you very much. And I'll start off by agreeing with you, Mr. Hamilton, that this program is extremely well administered, and credit to you and all the CRA agents out there. I did have some questions with respect to a line of questions brought up by some of my other colleagues, in that that some folks are, and actually a large amount of people, are not receiving this benefit as well as other benefits because they don't file their tax returns. You've made great progress here. 90% of people file online, but let's face it, the Income Tax Act is incredibly complicated. I don't know exactly how many pages are in there. Maybe you do, Mr. Hamilton, but it's thousands. It's very complicated. Now look at this compared to other places in the world. Say, for example, Estonia. In Estonia, their income tax system is much simpler. 98% of people do it online, and you can do it in 3 to 5 minutes on average. In fact, some people, it's not unusual for it to be one click. Do you believe that simplifying the Income Tax Act would make your job at the CRA easier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can't deny, even though it's not my responsibility to simplify the act, but I did work in Department of Finance for a while, and I do believe that if the Act was simplified, it would make our job easier. Now, making our job easier is not the sole objective of the Income Tax Act. But if you're asking from my perspective, yeah, simplification would make the CRA's job easier. And frankly, it would make our job easier in explaining to Canadians what the system looks like, what are the benefits. So as I said, we're not, that's not the only concern that someone has when constructing a tax system. But yes, it would make our job easier. And what we try to do is, no matter the complexity of the Act and no matter the complexity of the particular family situation we're dealing with, we just try to make sure that we have clear and consistent communication.
Perfect. And if you're able to have an easier job at it, I assume that you could also then make it easier for our applicants to apply, to file their tax returns and get their benefits. Is that a reasonable conclusion as well, or am I out to lunch there?
I think as a general statement, that would be true. The simpler the tax system is, the easier it is to explain and for people to understand how to get the benefits. Now, one thing to recognize is as you simplify the tax system, you might be removing some provisions that are of tremendous value to certain people. So there's lots of interesting trade-offs in all of that. But as the administrator, yes, if it were simpler, it would make our job easier. And easier not just for us, but for the recipients as well, in terms of understanding it.
Perfect. Madam Chair, I'll cede the remainder of my time. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. We will now go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes.
Sorry,
No?
I did not expect to have a turn, but that's fine. Don't you love it when you get caught like this? Okay, so I'm going to refer to the action plan for report or reference number 4.42, and it talks about by the end of March 2021. And I would like to know if you can provide an update on this recommendation about completing a review of procedures and notifying the CRA staff of any changes to ensure clear instruction on the type of documents that are suitable for supporting eligibility. And that would be to Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll respond. I think fully, but my colleague may want to correct me. My understanding is we have completed this review. We said we would do it by the end of March, but there may be some small amounts of activity that we still have to complete. But my sense is we're largely done with this. But I would just ask Frank to confirm that.
No, I think you're correct, and it's a complex process. There are many things to consider. It's not just a binary thing, so we're going to review all those procedures and go from there.
Okay, I look forward to seeing the report. Now it's mentioned it is going to take some more time to process the benefit applications for the first level agents to authenticate the information provided. And I'm just wondering, one of the examples was whether they could check if another child associated with the same parents have been born within the previous 9 months. Wouldn't this information already be picked up automatically by the system once it's inputted into the electronic database?
Madam Chair, I'll I'll just defer to my colleagues for the technical answer. I don't know if it's Frank or Heather that would want to jump in.
Heather, could you cover this? I don't have the answer for that.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So just for clarification purposes, the frontline agents who first deal with the applications are keying the information into the system. The system absolutely has controls in place to identify where there may be discrepancies or areas that would require a closer look. So if a child was born within the previous 9 months to the same family, that actual application will kick out for an assessor to do more investigation to ensure maybe it wasn't information in our system that is inaccurate, and they would have to validate the eligibility. So those agents who look at the applications at that time do have more time to do their review.
Okay. Will it be formalized in terms of the amount of time first line agents are able to expand on their initial processing of the benefit application? Because it was mentioned that the first level agents have about 5 minutes to do the initial processing. And if we want to make sure that we get all the information, will that extension of time be formalized?
Can I, thank you for the question. Madam Chair, I would like to reiterate that the accuracy of the processing of the initial applications has consistently been 99%. We have no reason to believe that more time is required by these first line keyers to process these applications. Their sole role is to key the information that is on the application into our system. And we have no record of these agents having difficulty in meeting this standard. The accuracy has been outstanding, and the timeliness is also being met on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, Ms. Daniels. Thank you, Ms. Yip. Our time is up, and that brings us to the end of our meeting with our witnesses today. I would like to thank you all for joining us. It's been a great meeting with a lot of good questions and answers. I would invite you to take your leave. And colleagues, I just want to remind you that we've had to juggle our schedule around a bit due to our extended meeting last week. So this Thursday's meeting will be on Report 5, follow up on Rail Safety, Transport Canada, and I think you would have received that notice of meeting. And finally, if you are in agreement, it is time for us to adjourn. Is the committee in agreement to adjourn? I'm seeing thumbs up. Thank you very much, colleagues. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.